psychedelics, psychokinesis, and a host of other types of paranormal phenomena. That's what I'll be speaking with author, educator, and spiritual seeker Sean McNamara about today.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
Now, you may be familiar with Sean's work because he has been all over YouTube demonstrating how he learned to move matter with his mind. It sounds like something that's science fiction, but it's quite real. He'll also talk about how you can do that too. Now, Kathy is away today because she is off on a new venture with none other than TV's Adam Berry. You know that name because Adam has been on Ghost Hunters and Kindred Spirits. Kathy and Adam have a new venture in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and I'll tell you a little bit about that at the end of the episode. Now, in terms of my conversation with Sean, it was so in-depth that we really had enough content for 2 episodes, so this is part 1. But if any of what I've described, whether telekinesis, psychedelics, other types of paranormal excitement, sound at all interesting to you, stay tuned for this episode of Curious Explorers. Sean, welcome. So nice to see you.
Thanks. It's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me to chat with you.
Yeah, I feel like, as I was mentioning, I feel like I know you, even though I don't yet, but it's the energy. So I'll give you a little brief introduction. Sean McNamara, you are a teacher, a prolific author. You are a therapist. You are a modern-day spiritual seeker. You have expertise with psychedelics, telekinesis, psychic development, and teaching all of these things and much more. So welcome. I know that's just the tip of the iceberg about all of who you are.
Oh, the human life is difficult to capture in a few sentences, and everything you listed is really, it's all years of development, right? So, yeah.
Well, yeah, let's start there too, because we're going to definitely talk about your newest book, and I know you have one that's in the works as well. But you have been somebody who has been really exploring the deeper kind of thread, the deeper levels of our inner and outer life, really for, it sounds like most of your lifetime, and more formally teaching other people how to access these kind of, I'm going to say innate, maybe mostly latent for most people, abilities and awareness. You teach them how to make things more deliberate and conscious so they can reach their full potential. I don't know if that, you're going to say it better than I will.
Well, when I teach the psychic development classes, is to really just help someone experience something that they already have the potential to do. I don't give anyone anything. There's no transfer of any special energy. It's just, here's a technique to show you that you have a non-physical consciousness, like all living creatures do, and that can allow a person to perform psychically, like telepathy or clairvoyance or things like that. And that's sort of the tail end of my story, is teaching people that ability. And it's really based on a chip on my shoulder, being cranky at formalized religion. When I was a kid, I developed a fear of death because of appendicitis when I was about 7 years old. And I was raised Catholic, which is a faith-based religion, not very evidential. And something in me is just too curious, too stubborn, too contradictory to just take a faith-based system and say, okay, I'll just believe that something continues in the afterlife and I'll feel okay about it. I needed more evidence. And I'm not criticizing the church or anything. It's just that for me, it doesn't work to be told what to believe and then leave it at that. So in my early adulthood, I became a Buddhist, thinking that learning how to meditate would give me some of the experience that I was looking for to get over my fear of death, to show me that there's more than just this physical body. And after years and years of practicing in that tradition, I realized at a certain point I had lost my way. Instead of really focusing on my personal quest to find out about what happens when we die, I just became a good student of Buddhism, learning all the teachings and the meditation techniques. I'd sort of forgotten what had gotten me there in the first place. And for various reasons, I ended up leaving that path. But one significant reason I left was I reached a point of frustration and decided to take my question even more into my own hands. how can I show that there's some part of me that is not physical? Do I have a non-physical consciousness? And I'd learned about something called the out-of-body experience or astral travel. I'd learned about it as a kid or in the 80s with Shirley MacLaine's made-for-TV movie, or that TV series Out on a Limb based on her book. There's one scene where she's in this hot spring in Peru looking at a candle, and suddenly she separates from her body. And I remembered that. And then later on, I had found a book by Robert, jeez, I'm spacing his name, Robert
Okay,
Monroe,
Robert Monroe.
who founded the Monroe Institute. So his first book about how to have out-of-body experiences, I'd read that a long time ago, but he teaches one technique in it. It hadn't worked very well for me, or didn't work at all for me. And I forgot about it. But now here I am, decades later, perhaps, and I wanted to really pursue this question: does anything continue? And by then, and thanks to the internet, because I didn't have that when I was a kid, I found that there were many other books written on the topic. And so I started studying these books and practicing those techniques. And I trained really hard for several months until I had my first out-of-body experience. And as soon as it was over, and it was very brief, but as soon as it was over and I came back, my fear of death was vanished, was gone. And since then, I've developed more sophisticated questions than does something continue? And that's a whole other conversation. But for me, realizing that all I needed was some basic instructions from books and to practice regularly, I was able to achieve this experience. And whether or not the out-of-body experience is, let's say, scientifically verifiable, the effect was it released me from my lifelong anxiety about death and the afterlife. And I realized I didn't need religion to have this experience. I didn't need a guru. I didn't need to ask anyone's permission or get anyone's blessing. I didn't have to pay thousands of dollars to go on some retreat. I didn't have to pay for special technology. The techniques were really meditation based in a sense. They're visualization based. All I needed was my mind and my willpower and my tenacity to keep trying over and over and over again until it happened. And that's what gave me the strength and courage to leave even my Buddhist path. I was like, I'm done with religion. I'm done with giving my personal authority to teachers or to spiritual leaders also. I realized if someone is given instructions, they can find their own answers. So I started pursuing other psychic abilities after that. The next one was telekinesis, or moving objects with the mind. And I taught myself how to do that, largely helped by watching other people's videos on YouTube. And then combining what I saw with what I knew about meditation. And again, that took several months before I was successful at doing that. And one reason I wanted to learn that was because even though I could teach people techniques for out-of-body experiences, you can't really see someone having it. You just see someone laying on the floor or laying on the couch. But mind over matter, you can observe that. There could be people in the room observing someone moving an object with the mind. So I thought this would be something I could learn myself and then teach people, because I've always been interested in teaching people anything. I just enjoy sharing information with people. And so I developed that and I started teaching that. And I was also learning about remote viewing, which is basically a clairvoyance using a specific protocol, a certain way to use your mind with clairvoyance to gain information. And so I learned that and started teaching that. So I'm not part of the official remote viewing crew or any of those people who are with Project Stargate or anything like that. I'm just an independent consciousness researcher and teacher who learned this protocol. And I teach it in a very organic, simple way so that people can experience it. And up to now my focus is really telepathy. That's what I've been teaching mostly the last couple of years. And what happens is I get bored. I can only teach the same thing for a couple of years and then I move on. But with telekinesis, I have a couple of books on that and I have an online course. They don't need me. The students don't need me. And I don't want to be needed. I don't want to create a dependent relationship between me and the people who learn these abilities in my classes. I want to set people free. And that's part of my chip on my shoulder about religion. If I can teach people these amazing things about their mind, and this word, I'm just using this word loosely, about their heart and their soul, their non-physical consciousness. If I can teach them how to make contact with that, how to get evidence that it's there, how to communicate with it, how to experience it, then that's another option. There's religion, and then there's this type of experience, which I can't even just say it's spirituality either. It's somewhere in between spirituality and science, because these are experiences people can verify with, psychically, with clairvoyance or telepathy. You can set up a target and then people write down what they're perceiving, and you can compare and measure. So in that way, it's not really woo-woo stuff. It's verifiable, and it's scientific, though. It's measurable, which I appreciate, because there's a lot of stuff in the spiritual realm that is not verifiable. And you just have to take it on faith, just like you have to with certain religions. And I just want to offer this other option of, here's a very straightforward way to see evidence that there's more to you than just the physical body. So that's sort of the short story of why I teach people psychic abilities.
I'm having about 150 thoughts, and I'm trying to organize them because I know we don't have like weeks to do, this episode, because I wouldn't do that to you. But, one, I imagine a lot of people actually do maybe secretly resonate with a lot of the specifics you're saying about your journey, your history. Because I'm thinking, I was a, fairly consistently sickly kid. I had these spontaneous out of body experiences. I maybe had one friend I could share a fraction with. And even then it was like, oh, to be the weird kid. And because I had a lot of ill people in my family, I had this crazy fear of death growing up. And so a lot of my reading in my early 20s and pursuit of various kind of trainings, some in psychic development and so forth, was to kind of A, get a handle on the first thing I mentioned, but B, not feel so anxious all the time about, oh my God, am I going to die in my sleep? Because our minds can run away with us. So I really resonate with what you're saying about that, like an experience or a type of experience can set you on a path. And a million other things you're saying, including like not that we don't need a guru or someone else to access the part of us that can access something and more enlightened or more aware or spiritually evolved. And I love that in other interviews that you've done that I've listened to, you just make it so clear, like you did today, that you are not looking to be somebody's guru. You want people to develop this, and you've actually laid things out in your books and your talks in a way that is, you're absolutely right. It's logical, orderly, procedural, and it's based on data. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be mysterious. There don't have to be any secrets or any special levels or anything like that. It's all out there.
Or somebody imparting something to you.
Right. Yeah, no, I just want to be a friend to people, like, hey, try this. And so I have a pretty anti-dogmatic stance. Anyway, that's my approach, is anti-dogma. And I tell people, like, when they come to my telepathy classes, I say, by the way, whatever I do today, you can take it. Teach your own class. Do exactly what I did. You'll be successful. Teach your own classes. And if you find a better method, I think I even wrote that in my first telekinesis book. If you find a better method, great. Take my method, improve it, change it, whatever. You don't have to adhere to anything. There's nothing to preserve here. The human race is in constant development and change, and I have no interest in trying to control anything that I teach that way. Like, this is the right way. No, there are ways we haven't even thought of that someone is going to come up with that's going to be even better. And if it's better for humanity, then great. Why restrict that? Versus, some religions, because they have a dogma, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, they have a set of teachings that change, or ideas from the outside, or maybe we could do this better. That's a threat, because it threatens the integrity of the dogma, because then it's not what it has always been. It's become something else. But if a community or lineage of teachers are associated with this, they can't afford for this to change, because it's a threat to their identity, right? So my hope is that, at least with psychic development and all the techniques that are available, then it never becomes dogmatic, because things will stop progressing at that point. And I don't think that's helpful.
I love that you're saying all that because really any field, even something that is not particular, not related to religion, there are people who get very married to one way of being. It becomes like a religion, and then anything else is either described as wrong or a threat. I mean, even as a psychologist, that was one of my frustrations during my training. And I remember saying to my own students later on many times, if someone tells you they have the one true way about anything, run in the other direction because we don't want to be limited in that way. That's ego involvement, I think.
Mhm.
So what you have said has really resonated. Um, it's funny because in your book, I have your most recent book, Dewdrops of Infinity, Psychedelics, Psychic Abilities, UFOs, and the Puharich Project. We're going to get to that in a moment. I was thinking as I had been jotting down my questions, telekinesis is probably the first thing that made me kind of aware of you and what you're doing because I think you had given a talk to like the Applied Precognition Project. I think that might have been, or at IRVA or something. And that would have been the first time I had become aware of the work you were doing. Um, the reason I want to start with the telekinesis is because once we go into your newest book, and talk about how spiritually transformative it is, I will feel like it's not appropriate almost for me to come back to telekinesis. It's not that there's not great stuff, I mean, about moving things with your mind, but I understand why you came to the conclusion you did later in your book, so we'll get to that. You sent me a video, and I have seen different videos of yours, and I will put it in the YouTube version of this interview. But basically, you have 3 pieces of foil balanced on a needle that is stuck into either a cork or a eraser and surrounded by glass. No breeze. Your hands aren't on the table. There's no vibrations making anything move. And not only do you make the foil rotate on the pinheads on each in these individual glass silos, it's going to be easier for anybody who's listening. Please go to the video. But you do it simultaneously. And it's not even that they're moving in the same direction. Can you talk about that? Were you like, oh my God, I can't believe what I'm doing?
Yeah, it's super
Yay,
weird.
me.
Yeah, experiments like that were really an expression of my boredom because I could only focus on just one thing before it just got boring. After, what else can I do? So could I move 3 at the same time? And what if I put them in a row in front of me? And part of my hope, and this was a long time ago when I did that, but I think part of my hope was to see, could it be that the object is just moving because of body heat? I always question myself with this stuff. I'm always terrified
That's
that I'm
great.
fooling myself. Am I fooling myself? And so I thought, if I line them up and try and move them all, how will they respond? And in some moments in that video, during that experiment, the one furthest away from me was moving when the other 2 closer to me were not, or they were moving at different rates, different speeds, which I think was evidence that it's not, if it was just body heat, then only the one closest to me would probably move and the others would remain still. But that didn't happen. And a lot of what was happening had to do with what was going on in my mind. What I found out with telekinesis, with moving these objects that are balanced on a needle, watching them spin, is, and this is what part of the evidence, although it's subjective, when my mind is relaxed and in tune and attentive in just the right way, the object spins. Piece of paper, piece of tinfoil, whatever it is, it moves. And especially at the beginning when I figured this out, if I got excited or if I tried too hard, it would stop. And I would notice that it stopped, notice that the level of tension in my mind and my body had increased. So I'd take a few minutes to do my breathing technique that I teach and relax. And as soon as I returned to that prior state of mind, it would start moving again. Also, when working with just one target, one object, I could work with the way I breathed. And again, it's not breath touching the object, because it's protective, but the breathing pattern I use, how I inhale, exhale, and hold the breath in at the end of the inhale and exhale, I could make the object stop when I wanted. And then when I released my breath or held it a certain way, it would start moving again. So its movement was tied in with my breathing cycle. Now, in this experiment, this video that you're talking about, we have 3 objects. I I didn't have that level of control because it's three. So how do I use my eyes? Because using the how you look affects consciousness too. How you use your eyes. And so here it's more complex because there's three objects. I'm looking through three glass containers, and I'm sitting higher above, so I didn't have the clearest line of sight to all three of them. And then it's really about my intention. Like, I'm trying to move all three, and it's as if, and this, I don't think this is what's actually happening, but it seems as if like waves of something are coming from me, from my mind, out in the direction of the three containers, like waves of something. But again, that's just a metaphor. I don't think that's actually what's happening. But that's how it seems to me when I use my mind in this way. So it was interesting to see that sometimes the object closest to me doesn't move, but the one in the middle does. And then the one in the back moves. And then the one closest to me then moves after that. I don't know what order all that happens. They're kind of random, but the fact that it's like the waves are going out further and further and eventually touch and then come back. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason to it. That if it was based on body heat or a constant physical force, then the movement would have been more constant. There would have been a more predictable notion here. But here we're talking about me balancing the stability and the relaxation versus excitement and tension, and then trying to, well, this one's moving, but now I got to get that one to go. Now I got to change my attention over there or move it over there. Now this one stops. So I'm going to move my focus back over here. And this funny thing happens, and this has happened from the beginning, when I could work on a single target, really want it to move. And then when I give up because I'm bored or sleepy or exhausted, maybe 45 minutes in, I've been sitting there staring at this thing, it doesn't move. And I just give up. And I'm like, okay, I'm done. And then it starts going because I got out of the way.
And again, just to describe for people who might only be listening, and anyone can do this. Anyone can find your videos because you're on YouTube at Mind Possible, and you have your website, mindpossible.com, right? And you have basically the idea of putting the needle on an eraser or a cork is just to keep the needle vertical and stable. A very light piece of tinfoil, because something lighter takes less of whatever moves it, less energy or whatever it is, or to move it, but balanced on the head of a pin. And then a glass hurricane turned upside down. So no air is getting in. You're not waving your hands. You're not, tapping on the table, all the things that people who are committed to not believing this is possible will, take up time on YouTube and post about. It's clear you're not doing anything, but your intention and attention are somehow affecting matter. Is that what it really boils down to?
Yeah.
And the way you imagine it is just kind of like a mental device to help focus that?
Yeah. So I have this formula. I call it TRIAM, TRIAM. And it stands for time plus relaxation plus intention plus attention equals movement. That's basically what I do. So it's a combination of intention. My intention is for the object to move. Attention, the way I look at it, which is not laser focused. It's actually very holistic and relaxed. And then the very first ingredient, T, for time. It takes time to accumulate whatever needs to happen inside that glass container for the object to move. So it's not instant. Sometimes it takes longer than other times, which largely has to do with my state of mind. Am I too tense? Do I need more time to relax? Things like that. So there's that formula combined with a breathing technique. In a lot of Eastern practices, anyone familiar with Hatha yoga or some of the tantric Buddhist practices where you work with the prana or the chi using breath work. And so you affect the flow of subtle energy in the body. And so I use that too. And whether or not it's moving energy in the body, I don't know, but it helps me relax in a very predictable way. I don't know if energy is being exuded from me when I do this, and if that's pushing on the piece of tinfoil or paper. In fact, I don't think that's what's happening. I've been in conversation with some scientists over the years, and I agree with this idea that some of them have proposed to me that what's happening is somehow I'm projecting my intention, my desire for something to happen, and something bigger than me is affecting the air molecules inside the container, which normally move randomly, creating equal pressure inside a closed system. Something causes the air molecules to move coherently, like wind against a sail, and they start pushing on the objects, making it spin. So, and I don't even think that way when I'm doing the technique. I'm not trying to talk to the molecules. Come on, push on it. I didn't even have that idea until some scientist talked to me about that. He said, maybe that's what's happening. Until then, I thought maybe there's some subtle energy coming from me and that's pushing the thing. But this makes more sense to me that, oh, at some point, the non-physical does have to interact with the physical to produce the effect. For example, when an energy healer works on someone who has a disease or illness, at some point that energy does have to coincide with physical cells and with the immune system, and the body does heal itself with that. So it takes both interacting. So the idea that maybe whatever I'm doing with my mind is, and the air molecules are responding, that's the intersection of physical and non-physical, or physical and consciousness. But I don't think we have the scientific instruments yet to determine if that's really what's happening. These are all just hypotheses. So
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
frustrating.
it's an interesting and a hypothesis, and it's about your intention interacting with the air molecules and moving the tinfoil, and I can get behind that. And though I've seen you do your experiment where you take the light bulbs and throw them on the floor and intend that they not shatter. And
Mhm.
I can only imagine how difficult that is to do. But that is not, I don't know that that's the air molecules protecting the light bulb. I think you're somehow one with the light bulb. Which again, for anybody just listening and not watching, this is going to sound less rational, but maybe it doesn't have to be. So, can I tell you two anecdotes about telekinesis? Because I feel like a kid who's like, I got to tell you my story from school. So, anecdote one, I have someone who has become a very good friend. Like, there's just such a resonance there. And by day, this person is an incredible landscape designer, does not, is thoughtful about who he shares these things with. He is absolutely a philosopher. He's so well read. He's such a deep thinker. Um, and he was learning, I don't even remember which martial art. Um, but he spent months in his basement practicing, trying to make something move. And I can't remember what it was. And finally got frustrated and gave up. And I'm going to have to check with him on this, but I believe like a brick flew across the room. It was like something incredibly heavy. I can't imagine, you know, anything generating enough pressure against air molecules to do that. I feel like it's got to be something, again, beyond what I can explain. But by the way, he never tried to do it again. He was so freaked out. So I think that these things can happen spontaneously too. Do you have thoughts on that? When you're practicing, yes, and maybe sometimes like suddenly.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense that your friend worked at it for a long time, and then it just happened after that spontaneously. It's like when I was working to make the target move, and then when I give up at the end, then it moved.
And that's what he did.
He gave up, and then it happened in its own time when all the causes and conditions came together for it to release. So that in that sense, it's not exactly spontaneous. There was a buildup on his part. He had put a lot of effort into it,
Good
and
point.
it was the release after that. But can things happen spontaneously? Maybe. And there's also, this makes me think of the notion of apports, APPORT. And that's where physical objects are moving through the agency of the spirit world. And so they're using their intention and attention to move these physical objects. But they can move much heavier things than I can. And maybe it's because they're disembodied entirely.
You have an example in your book that I was going to bring up. So I'm so glad that you did, because now maybe we'll now segue into the specifics of your book, which, by the way, you were so thoughtful and so methodical in your research, your various experiments that you've conducted over quite a period of time with volunteers, making sure that you did everything to control for any other possible reason why something might happen. And after doing this for months, you were in a coffee shop when the apport. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So this was during the second half of a year's worth of experiments involving psychedelics and psychic abilities. And something happened in the first part of the experiment where one night I was looking for books about psychedelics and remote viewing. And I found a book that I hadn't found before, written by someone named Jean Malay. And it was just strange that it popped up. And this was in the middle of the night. I went to the couch and just was browsing and found her book. And I was able to download it. And it was perhaps the best remote viewing book I've ever read. And it had a small segment mentioning psychedelics in it. I was like, who's this Jean Malay? And I looked her up, and she passed on a while ago. She seemed like an extraordinary woman. And Gail Hyson, who I've been interviewed by, her podcast is this Small Medium at Large podcast. They were friends. So I had this connection with Gail. And then I had felt this strange connection with Jean, because what was it that woke me up in the middle of the night to cause me to search for this book and then find it? And
Jean.
Jean, right?
I think Jean woke you up, actually.
So at some point later on, I'm driving across the city of Denver, and I was on YouTube. I listen to YouTube while I'm driving my car, and I found an interview with Jean in it. And I'm driving past this coffee shop, and Jean starts talking about consciousness, things like that, and also skepticism. And suddenly I need to use the facility. So I pull into this Starbucks and I go to the bathroom. Then I stand in line to order a coffee. And I look around, and there may be 2 or 3 people sitting at tables. It's a very small Starbucks. There's a guy in front of me. He gets his coffee and goes. And then I'm standing, and I place my order to the barista. And the barista turns around, and he's off making my coffee. And I'm standing there, and I see this bright flash of blue at the level of my knee. It's sort of out of the corner of my eye, or the bottom of my eye, at the level of my. And I just sort of ignore it. The way we normally ignore these small perceptions that for our conscious mind, it's not important. It's not a threat. Which is interesting, because if you see a little spider out of the corner of your eye, people respond, because our brain is geared. It can identify threats very easily. But a little blue spark of light, my ego is like, it's nothing. But then I heard a tick sound, and I ignored it. And then I heard this scraping sound. And I turn around and look sort of behind my foot, and there's this beautiful blue glass bead. And I realized I saw a blue flash of light. Then I heard something just land like that. And then, as if it was being dragged across the floor, but just around my foot, like it was trying to get my attention or something. I looked down, blue bead. And I spend the next 20 minutes. Eventually I get my coffee, and I'm looking throughout the store. The barista must have thought I was nuts, because I'm looking at the beverage section, I'm looking at the food section. I'm like, where are these blue beads? It must have fallen out of the ceiling. Where did it fall from? There's not another blue bead in the entire coffee shop. But I put it in my pocket, and I get in my car and continue listening to the interview with Jean. At that point, she starts talking about how adults need to be more like children and really be more open to this idea that we are more than what we normally think we are, that we are multidimensional beings. We need to stop being so smart as adults. We're too skeptical. And which was a perfect lesson for me, because that's how I felt with this blue bead. I was like, it can't be. It couldn't possibly be an apport. But the fact that I'd been listening to Jean right before driving near the coffee shop, and then she says that in the interview right after, it's just too much, too coincidental. And later on, I took the bead out of my pocket. A couple times I did this. One time I showed it to someone, and I dropped it, and the bead bounces like crazy on a hard surface, bounced several times. But in that coffee shop, when the blue light flashed, it landed and it stuck. It didn't bounce, which is really strange.
So weird. It is.
This was not ordinary. The way it entered my experience was not ordinary. But later on, I could throw it around, but it would just behave like a regular glass bead. So something about that moment was unique. So it's really interesting. And the color blue, there's an association there with Jean had given Gail her favorite dress, and this is a beautiful blue dress. So the color blue, So too many connections there. And of course, there's always be some small percentage of my mind that's like, am I making all this up? Am I making myself crazy here? But this is in the midst of this year-long psychic experiment involving psychedelics, where there's tons and tons of evidence.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
This has been another episode of Curious Explorers. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my interview with Sean McNamara. Stay tuned for part 2, where Sean will talk more about his book, Dewdrops of Infinity, and the year-long experiment into whether psychedelics could improve psychic functioning. Sean also talks about the unexpected impact of this experiment on his worldview. It changed his life for the better, so you don't want to miss that. And as promised, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Kathy Kelly and Adam Berry's venture in Provincetown, Massachusetts. It's Provincetown Paranormal, also known as P-Town Paranormal. They are doing a whole host of ghost tours. What a wonderful team to learn from. So if you've enjoyed Adam's shows, Ghost Hunters and Kindred Spirits, this is where you'll get a chance to interact with Adam and Kathy in person, live and in the flesh, as you check out ghosts, history, and much more. And until next time, of course, be well.
The paranormal is real. It is real. The paranormal is real. Is it? The paranormal is real. It is real. The paranormal.